The iron rose of Copper Creek. The desert wind carried the smell of death through Copper Creek that morning, not the clean death of a quick bullet, but the slow, rotting kind that came from corruption festering in the bones of a dying town. At 28, Margaret Maggie Calloway had seen enough death to recognize its scent from a mile away. She'd buried their husband 3 years ago, shot in the back by claim jumpers who thought a widow wouldn't fight for a worthless silver mine. They were wrong about both the widow and the mine. Maggie stood behind the bar of the Last Dollar Saloon, her establishment, her fortress. The morning light filtered through dusty windows, illuminating the poker tables where fortunes changed hands and men's true natures were revealed. She wore a simple black dress, respectable but practical, with sleeves rolled to her elbows. Beneath the bar, within easy reach, rested a sawed-off shotgun she'd named Persuasion. She'd only had to use it twice. Both times the men who'd forced her hand never made the same mistake again. The town had changed in recent months. A railroad company, the Continental Western Line, had announced plans to push through Copper Creek, promising prosperity and progress. But progress had a price, and that price was being collected by a man named Horace Drummond, the railroad's land acquisition specialist, a fancy title for a vulture in a three-piece suit. Drummond had arrived 6 weeks ago with a smile like oil on water and a small army of hired guns disguised as security consultants. One by one, the holdouts who refused to sell their land at Drummond's insulting prices met with unfortunate accidents. Old Man Chen's laundry burned down. The Martinez family's cattle were poisoned. Reverend Wash's church suffered mysterious structural damage that nearly killed him during Sunday service. The message was clear: sell or suffer. Maggie had received her first visit from Drummond 3 days ago. He'd walked into her saloon at high noon, flanked by 2 of his men. One was a towering brute named Ox Mallory, whose neck was thicker than most men's thighs. The other was a thin, weasel-faced gunslinger called Jimmy Quick-Draw Parsons, who wore his revolvers low and tied down like he was auditioning for a dime novel. Drummond had ordered whiskey, which Maggie poured without comment. He'd sipped it slowly, his cold gray eyes taking inventory of everything she owned. "Fine establishment, Mrs. Calloway," he'd said, his voice smooth as snakeskin. "Prime location, too, right where we need to put the main depot. I'm prepared to offer you $1,500. Maggie had continued wiping down the bar. The building and lounge were worth 10 times that, and he knew it. "Not interested," she'd replied simply. Drummond's smile never wavered, but something dark flickered behind his eyes. "I'd reconsider if I were you. This town is changing. Those who adapt will prosper. Those who resist—" He let the sentence hang in the air like a noose. Well, accidents happen with such unfortunate frequency these days. She'd met his gaze without flinching. "The only accident that's going to happen is you tripping on your way out my door if you don't finish that whiskey and leave." Quick-Draw Parsons had laughed at that, his hand drifting toward his gun. Maggie's hand disappeared beneath the bar, re-emerging with Persuasion. The distinctive double click of hammers being cocked cut through the room like a judge's gavel. "I wouldn't," she'd said quietly. Drummond had raised a hand, stopping his man. He'd stood slowly, adjusting his expensive coat. "You're making a terrible mistake, Mrs. Calloway. I always get what I want. Always." Then he'd walked out, his men following like trained dogs. That was 3 days ago. Now, as Maggie prepared for another day of business, she heard the commotion outside. Shouting, the thunder of hoofs. She grabbed Persuasion and stepped onto the wooden walkway just in time to see young Billy Chen, the laundryman's teenage son, galloping into town on the half-dead horse, screaming for help. They took Sarah Martinez," Billy shouted, his voice cracking with panic and exhaustion. "Drummond's men. They rode to the Martinez ranch at dawn. They beat Senor Martinez unconscious and took Sarah. Said she'll be returned unharmed once the deed is signed." Ice water flooded Maggie's veins. Sarah Martinez was 17, barely more than a child. Sweet girl who helped her mother sell empanadas in the town square every Saturday. The bastards had just declared war. The crowd that gathered was a mixture of outrage and fear. Sheriff Tom Brickman pushed his way through, his badge catching the morning sun. He was a good man, honest, but outmatched. Now hold on everyone, let's not jump to conclusions. I'll ride out to Drummond's campin'. And what? Maggie cut him off, her voice sharp as broken glass. Asked nicely, Sheriff, you know as well as I do that Drummond has more guns than you have deputies. Sarah Martinez doesn't have time for diplomacy. Brickman's face reddened. What do you suggest, Maggie? That we form a mob, start a shooting war? I suggest, Maggie said, her mind already racing through possibilities, that someone who knows how to handle themselves pays Drummond a visit. Someone he won't see coming. She looked directly at the sheriff. Someone who has nothing left to lose. Understanding dawned in Brickman's eyes, followed quickly by protest. Maggie, no, you're talking about suicide. Drummond has at least a dozen men out at that camp. Then I better bring more than persuasion, she replied. She went back into the saloon, her boot heels clicking on the wooden floor with military precision. In her private quarters behind the bar, she opened the trunk that had belonged to her late husband Jack. Inside was his legacy, a pair of matched Colt Peacemakers, a Winchester rifle and something special, a gift from an explosives expert he'd saved during a mine collapse. 3 sticks of dynamite, carefully wrapped and preserved, along with fuses and blasting caps. Maggie changed into riding clothes, denim pants that scandalized the church ladies, but allowed her to move freely. A dark shirt, and a husband's old leather vest reinforced with steel plates sewn into the lining. Jack had been paranoid about knife attacks. That paranoia might save her life today. She strapped on the gun belt, the weight of the Peacemaker settling comfortably on her hips. The Winchester went into a saddle scabbard. The dynamite went into a carefully padded saddlebag, along with 100 rounds of ammunition and a canteen of water. When she emerged, Sheriff Brickman was waiting with her horse, a steel-gray gelding named Judge. I can't officially sanction this, he said quietly, checking the cinches on her saddle, but I can make sure no one follows you for at least 2 hours. That give you enough time? It'll have to be a way, Maggie replied, mounting up. Maggie, Brickman grabbed her stirrup, his weathered face serious. Drummond's camp is 5 miles north, in that old box canyon near the dried-up creek bed. He's got sentries posted. If you're really doing this, you can't ride in the front door. She nodded. I wasn't planning to. As she rode out of Copper Creek, the sun was climbing higher, turning the desert into a skillet. Maggie didn't take the main trail north. Instead, she cut west, circling wide around where she knew Drummond would have lookouts posted. She'd spent 3 years exploring every inch of this territory, while working her mine. She knew paths that didn't appear on any map. 2 hours later, she'd approached the box canyon from the east, coming in from the high ground. She left Judge tethered in a hidden wash, with enough water and shade to keep him comfortable, then proceeded on foot, crawling the last 100 yards on her belly, to peer down into Drummond's camp. It was more fortified than she'd expected. A dozen tents arranged in a semicircle with the canyon wall serving as a natural barrier on one side. A large supply wagon sat near the center, probably carrying surveying equipment and railroad documents. Guards were posted at the canyon entrance and along the perimeter. She counted 15 men total, all armed. And there, tied to a post near Drummond's personal tent, was Sarah Martinez. Even from a distance, Maggie could see the girl was terrified but unharmed. A small mercy, but a mercy nonetheless. Drummond himself sat in a folding chair beneath a canvas awning, drinking coffee and reading a newspaper as casually as if he were in a San Francisco hotel. The arrogance was staggering. Maggie studied the layout with a tactical eye. The canyon walls were steep but not impossible to climb. The rock was sedimentary, layered and fractured, unstable if you knew where to apply pressure. An idea began to form, dangerous and desperate, but possible. She couldn't shoot her way through 15 men, but she didn't need to. She just needed to create enough chaos to grab Sarah and run. and she needed Drummond to understand that Corporal Creek was not his for the taking. As the afternoon sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the canyon, Maggie moved into position. She had climbed to a ledge about 40 feet above the camp, directly over where the supply wagon sat. The canyon wall here showed visible stress fractures, probably from ancient water erosion. Perfect. She prepared the first stick of dynamite carefully, crimping the blasting cap onto a long fuse. She'd need time to get clear after lighting it. Her hands were steady despite the sweat running down her back. Fear was natural. Panic was deadly. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. Below she could hear fragments of conversation. Drummond was dictating a telegram to one of his men, something about securing all necessary parcels by month's end. He spoke about people's lives and livelihoods the way other men discuss livestock. Maggie struck a match, touching it to the fuse. The spark caught, hissing to life. She waited just long enough to ensure it would burn true, then wedged the dynamite deep into the largest crack she could find. Then she moved, scrambling along the ledge toward a rope she'd secured earlier for her descent into camp. The explosion came exactly when she expected it. The blast wasn't huge, she'd used only one stick, but in the confined canyon, the sound was apocalyptic. More importantly, the concussive force hid the fractured wall exactly where she'd aimed. A section of canyon wall the size of a stagecoach broke free, crashing down directly onto the supply wagon. The wagon exploded in a shower of splintering wood and scattering equipment. Men shouted, dove for cover, grabbed weapons and spun in circles trying to locate an enemy they couldn't see. In the chaos, Maggie rappelled down her rope, hitting the ground 30 yards from where Sarah was tied. She pulled one of the peacemakers and shot the rope binding the girl with one clean shot. "Run!" Maggie shouted, grabbing Sarah's arm and pulling her toward the eastern wall where her escape route waited. There! Quick Draw Parsons spotted them, his revolvers appearing in his hands like magic. Bullets chewed the ground near Maggie's feet. She turned, both peacemakers coming up, and returned fire. She wasn't trying to hit him in the chaos and dust. She just needed to make him duck. It worked. Parsons dove behind a tent as her bullets perforated the canvas around him. But now everyone knew where she was. Ox Mallory charged from the left, roaring like his namesake. Maggie couldn't outrun him while dragging Sarah. She made a split-second decision, pushing the girl toward the canyon wall. "Climb. There's a path." Then she turned to face Ox. The big man was fast for his size, covering ground with frightening speed. Maggie fired twice at center mass. The bullets hit. She saw his shirt tear, but he kept coming. The steel plates. The bastard was wearing armor too. She adjusted her aim upward and fired again. This shot took Ox in the throat. He went down hard, clutching at the wound, his charge ending in a sprawling tumble. Maggie Calloway. Drummond's voice cut through the chaos. She turned to see him standing near his tent, a derringer in one hand and a handful of Sarah's hair in the other. He grabbed the girl before she could reach the wall. Clever, very clever, but checkmate, I'm afraid. Maggie's heart hammered, but her gun hand remained steady. "Let her go, Drummond. This is between you and me." "No," Drummond said pleasantly, pressing the small pistol against Sarah's temple. "This is between me and anyone who defies me. You've killed 2 of my men, destroyed my supplies. I'm a businessman, Mrs. Calloway. I can't let that stand unpunished." The remaining men had formed a semicircle, cutting off escape routes. Maggie was outnumbered, outgunned, and out of position. She calculated the odds of a successful shot. Hitting Drummond without hitting Sarah from this distance with a handgun was possible but far from certain. If she missed, Sarah died. "What do you want?" Maggie asked, buying time. "I want you to drop your weapons, then I want you to walk over here, kneel down, and beg forgiveness in front of my men, and then—" Drummond smiled. "Then I want you to sign over your deed to the last dollar. Do this and the girl lives. You get to live too, though I'll be shipping you to a rather unpleasant mining camp in Nevada, where your particular talents can be put to use. Refuse, and everyone in Corporal Creek learns what happens to those who resist progress." Maggie's mind raced. She couldn't let him win, but she couldn't let Sarah die either. There had to be a way. She let her eyes drift slightly, scanning for options, and that's when she saw it. A small wooden box near the ruined wagon. The distinctive markings indicated blasting supplies. Drummond had his own explosives for clearing the railroad path. The box had been thrown clear of the wagon's destruction, landing near a campfire that was still burning. And between Maggie and that box was about 20 feet of open ground. It was insane. She'd never make it. But she'd never gotten anywhere in life playing it safe. "All right," Maggie said, lowering her gun slowly. "You win, Drummond. I'll do what you want." She began walking forward, her hands raised, the peacemakers dangling from her fingers, by the trigger guards, the universal sign of surrender. Drummond relaxed slightly, his grip on Sarah loosening just a fraction. "Smart woman. I knew you'd see Reese." Maggie moved. She hurled both peacemakers directly at Drummond's face, not the kill shot but the distraction. He flinched, ducking away from the flying metal, and his derringer discharged harmlessly into the air. Sarah, bless her quick mind, went limp, dead weight in his arms. In that half-second of chaos, Maggie dove for the Winchester she'd spotted leaning against the tent post. She came up with the rifle in one smooth motion, levering around into the chamber and firing in the same heartbeat. Her target wasn't Drummond. It was the box of blasting supplies. The explosion was magnificent. It created a wall of fire and smoke between Drummond's men and the eastern escape route. Maggie didn't waste the opportunity. She grabbed Sarah, who'd torn free during Drummond's moment of distraction, and ran for the canyon wall. Bullets chased them, chewing rock and kicking up dust. Maggie fired the Winchester one-handed behind her, not aiming, just creating suppressing fire. They hit the wall and started climbing the path she'd scouted earlier. It was narrow, treacherous, designed for mountain goats, rather than people, but it was their only shot. Quick-draw Parsons appeared at the base of the path, his revolvers coming up. Maggie had one round left in the Winchester. She took the shot from 30 feet up. Parsons jerked backward, a red flower blooming on his shoulder. Not fatal, but enough to take him out of the fight. They kept climbing. Sarah was tough, keeping pace despite her terror. Behind them, Drummond was screaming orders, his composure finally shattered. "After them. I want them dead. $1,000 to whoever brings me Calloway's head." But the path was too narrow for multiple men to climb at once, and every time someone tried, Maggie would appear above them with one of her peacemakers and send them scrambling back down. She'd recover their guns during a brief pause in the chaos. 20 minutes later, they crested the canyon rim. Judge was waiting where she'd left him, along with Sarah's horse. The men had brought it when they'd kidnapped her. Maggie had never been so happy to see an animal in her life. They rode hard, taking a winding route that would be difficult to track in the fading light. Only when they were within sight of Copper Creek did Maggie finally allow herself to believe they'd made it. The town turned out in force when they arrived. Sarah was immediately swept up by her weeping mother, while her father, bandaged but unbowed, shook Maggie's hand with tears in his eyes. Sheriff Brickman helped her dismount, his expression mixing relief and concern. "Drummond?" he asked quietly. "Alive," Maggie confirmed. "Angry, and coming for revenge, you can bet on it." "Then we better get ready," Brickman said. He raised his voice to the crowd. "Listen up. Drummond and his men will be here by morning probably. They'll come with guns blazing, trying to make an example of us. Every man who can shoot needs to be armed. Every woman and child who can't fight needs to be in the church. It's the sturdiest building we have." Old man Chen stepped forward, his weathered face determined. "We stand together, all of us. This is our town." The sentiment spread through the crowd like wildfire. These were frontier people, hardened by the desert and the constant struggle for survival. They'd been beaten down one by one, picked off in isolation, but together they were something different. They were dangerous. Maggie spent the night preparing. The last dollar became an armory and war council. She distributed weapons to those who didn't have them and taught quick lessons in defensive positions. The town had advantages Drummond's men lacked: intimate knowledge of every building, every alley, every firing position. Dawn came with thunder. Drummond's force appeared on the horizon like a plague of locusts. He'd gathered every hired gun he could find. Maggie counted at least 20 men. They rode in formation, spreading out to surround the town. Drummond himself rode at the head, his expensive suit replaced with practical riding clothes, and the gun belt that looked like it meant business. He carried a speaking trumpet, which he raised to his mouth as he stopped just outside rifle range. "People of Copper Creek," his amplified voice echoed through the morning air, "you are harboring a criminal, a murderer. Maggie Calloway killed my men and destroyed my property. Surrender her now, and we'll leave peacefully. Refuse, and we'll take her by force. You have 5 minutes to decide." Sheriff Brickman stood in the middle of the main street, his own rifle cradled in his arms. "We don't negotiate with kidnappers and murderers, Drummond. You started this fight when you terrorized innocent people. Copper Creek stands together." "So be it," Drummond roared. He lowered the trumpet and raised his hand, signaling his men to advance. They came in fast, riding hard, expecting the town to break and scatter. Instead, they were met with a wall of gunfire from windows, rooftops, and alleyways. Maggie had positioned the defenders perfectly. Crossfire lanes that turned the main street into a killing field. Drummond's men weren't soldiers, they were guns for hire. When the bullets started flying in earnest, their formation shattered. Some dismounted and took cover. Others wheeled their horses around and retreated. A few kept coming only to be cut down by concentrated fire. Maggie fought from the saloon's upper floor, her Winchester barking steadily. She didn't waste ammunition. Each shot was carefully aimed at targets presenting real threats. She hit one man trying to set fire to the general store, another who'd gotten a bead on Sheriff Brickman, a third who was attempting to flank around through the livery. The battle raged for 20 minutes that felt like hours. Smoke filled the street. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the copper tank of blood. Drummond's superior numbers meant nothing when they couldn't bring them to bear effectively. Finally, a white flag appeared. Drummond, pinned down behind the water trough with only 3 men remaining, had had enough. The shooting ceased gradually, an eerie silence falling over the devastated street. "We're leaving," Drummond shouted. "We're done." Sheriff Brickman emerged from cover, his rifle trained on Drummond. "You'll leave when I say you can leave. First, you're going to compensate every person in this town for damages. Second, you're going to tell your railroad bosses that Copper Creek is off limits. Third, you're going to get on that horse and never come back. You do these things, you get to live." Drummond's face was purple with rage, but he was beaten and he knew it. "The railroad will hear about this. You'll all be—" "The railroad will hear the truth," Maggie interrupted, stepping out of the saloon with a satchel in her hand. "I made copies of all your correspondence before we started shooting. Letters detailing your methods. Orders to intimidate, burn, and terrorize. Names, dates, everything. These are going to every newspaper from here to Washington, along with witness statements from everyone in this town." She tossed the satchel at his feet. "That's your copy. We've got others hidden where you'll never find them. You breathe a word of revenge. You send one more hired gun our way, and the Continental Western Line will be the most hated company in America. They'll lose their federal land grants. Their investors will flee, and you, Mr. Drummond, will be the scapegoat they feed to the courts." Drummond stared at the satchel like it was a rattlesnake. The calculation was clear in his eyes. He'd lost, completely and utterly. "Mount up," he growled to his men. They gathered their wounded and their dead, climbing onto their horses with the defeated posture of broken men. As they rode out of Copper Creek, the townspeople watched in silence. No cheers, no celebration, just the grim satisfaction of survival. When they were finally gone, the work began. Buildings needed repair. Wounded needed tending. The dead, 2 townsfolk killed in the fighting, needed burying. Maggie worked alongside everyone else, her fancy gun set aside for a hammer and nails. 3 days later, a telegram arrived from Maggie at the repair telegraph station. It was from the president of the Continental Western Line. The message was brief and to the point. Horace Drummond had been terminated. The railroad would be rerouting around Copper Creek, respecting the town's sovereignty. Generous compensation would be provided for any prior damages. The company regretted the actions of their former employee and hoped this incident wouldn't damage their reputation. Maggie read it twice, then handed it to Sheriff Brickman, who posted it in the window of his office for all to see. That night the Lost Dollar Saloon opened for business as usual. Maggie stood behind her bar, persuasion in its place beneath the counter, and poured drinks for the survivors. Someone started playing piano, someone else started singing. The weight of fear that had hung over the town for months lifted like morning fog. Sarah Martinez approached the bar, her mother beside her. "Senora Calloway," the girl said formally, her dark eyes serious. "My father and I, we can never repay what you did." Maggie set down the glass she was wiping. "You don't owe me anything, Sarah. We protect our own here. That's how it works." "Still," the girl persisted, "when I'm older, stronger, I want you to teach me. Teach me how to shoot, how to fight, how to be brave like you." Maggie studied the young woman, seeing echoes of her own younger self. The determination, the steel underneath the fear. She smiled, a rare, genuine expression. "Come by Sunday afternoons, bring your own ammunition, I'll teach you what I know." As the night wore on and the saloon filled with life and laughter, Maggie found a quiet moment to step outside. The desert stars blazed overhead, countless and eternal. Somewhere out there Jack was buried in the simple grave she visited. When the loneliness got too heavy to bear, she wondered what he'd think of all this. "I held the line," she said softly to the night sky. "I held our line." The wind whispered back, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Copper Creek would thrive now, free from Drummond's shadow. The railroad would find another route. Other towns would benefit from the steel and progress. And here, in this small corner of the territory, people would tell stories about the woman who'd faced down an army. They'd call her the Iron Rose of Copper Creek. Beautiful, dangerous, and impossible to break. Maggie Calloway, returning to her saloon and her life. Let them talk. She knew the truth. She was just a widow who'd drawn a line in the sand and defended it. Nothing more, nothing less. But on the frontier, sometimes that was enough to become a legend.